Hello and welcome to episode 100. I'm so excited today to talk to our guests, but also that we are finally celebrating this 100 episodes. Today's episode is about the world of ETFs and IPOs and PR best practices, more specifically in the finance sector. But what you hear today is going to be applied to everything, any kind of media relations. So, Alexandra Levis, thank you for joining us.
Welcome to the PR Playbook Podcast, the only podcast giving you actionable skills and advice you need to execute a strategic PR program. Warning: what you hear next may lead to brand awareness and increased sales and customer exposure. Now here's your host, Rinjini Joshua.
Hello and welcome to very exciting episode 100. I am so excited about this. One, because 100 is a big number, and also because we are talking about preparing your startup for IPO and best practices in PR with my new friend, Alexandra Levis. Hello, Alexandra.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, should I call you Alex for the purposes of this podcast, or Alexandra? Which one do you prefer?
Whatever, Alex is fine.
Okay, cool.
We're casual over here.
Yeah. All right. So, give us a little bit of background. I just would love for everybody to get to know you a little bit. And I'm excited to kind of dive into our conversation, but also just kind of talk about, we talked a little bit previously about, some of the nuances of PR and press releases and all these fun little anecdotes that us PR pros have. But yeah, first, let's get a little introduction on who you are, what you do, and we'll take it from there.
Great. So I'm Alexandra. My friends call me Alex. I run a marketing and PR firm called Arro Financial Communications. We specialize in the financial services space. And we actually have a particular subspecialization in helping clients launch exchange-traded products or exchange-traded funds, ETFs, which are essentially mini IPOs that happen all the time. So I'm so excited to talk to you guys today about how to prepare your PR campaign for an IPO, which I think is something that can be, extrapolated for different investment vehicles or really just startups in general. And then in terms of my background, so I launched the agency in 2013. And prior to that, I ran marketing and PR for an investment firm in New York. And prior to that, I worked at a financial PR agency. So I've been in the financial communication space now for a good 10 years. I've worked with a lot of amazing clients. I've worked with a lot of interesting products. And I think it's really given me kind of a bird's eye view of what is the best bang for your buck in marketing and PR? What's the most effective way to make an impact? What's the best way to use a budget? And most importantly, how do you make investors sit up and take notice, right? There's so many products launching on the different exchanges every single day, and it's a pretty crowded space. So I've really spent the last 10 years of my career trying to hone in on, what are some things that will give an end client that aha moment to invest in your product? What are some creative ways to think about storytelling and narration in a world that's, kind of stodgy and old school. I mean, financial services has never been a particularly creative field.
Yeah,
so,
I was just taking a little note of asking you about creative storytelling in finance, because that's interesting. It's got to be really creative.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, we talk about the financial industry, but it's made up of people, and that's where the interesting stuff comes. So whether it's timely or controversial or human interest angle, I think really any industry, you can get kind of creative with any industry. Every industry has a story. Every founder that started a company, whether it's, fertilizer or whether it's, denim, like everybody has a story. So one of our jobs is really to kind of harness what that story is and make it relevant to the end user. So that's a little bit about my background. And to date, I'll just say that, we work with clients of all sizes. And I think that's something that's really important that gets lost is people who are in startup mode think they have to get to like a certain size before they can hire an agency and all that kind of stuff. And I think what's so great about your podcast is you give so many interesting tidbits and insights so people can do it on their own if they want, or they can listen in for best practices of how to hire an agency. And I think that it's important for firms of all sizes to think about PR, because I really do believe listen, I've worked on ad campaigns, I've worked on social media, I've worked on events, I've worked on sponsorships. I really do believe PR is the best bang for your buck, regardless of the size of your firm. And I think that's
Oh,
a really important takeaway.
yeah, I'm actually working on a white paper right now on measurement, PR measurement. And like, that's like our controversial topic that we talk about within the industry is like, how do you measure PR? And I do think people just don't realize like how much credibility like good PR can have. And I appreciate you bringing that up because we'll talk about it a little bit later, but I want to talk really more focused right now about, preparing your startup for IPO, what kind of press you need to think about, what kind of strategy really you need to think about as you're going into something like that or an EFT, and kind of what are the like preliminary steps when you're a startup. First, how early should you start? I want to talk about this because I always tell people like don't come to me telling me you need to launch something tomorrow. How early should you start and kind of go from there through the process, the IPO
Yeah.
process?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say if you're going to handle PR internally, ideally you want to start like 2 months before your product launch. I think if you're going to hire an agency, maybe a little bit less because presumably that agency could do it a little bit faster. But, there's a whole
True.
onboarding aspect, right? So maybe like give it a month and a half or something like that. So the agency can onboard you as a client and then also do their due diligence, right? Because if you're working with an outsourced vendor, they have to then get up to speed on your product. And that's
Yeah.
something that people tend to forget about for, for some
It's like
reason.
it's a magical thing. Like, let's sync our what is it like from Avatar? Let's sync our
Yes,
tails together, and all
right.
of a sudden, everything.
Exactly. So you definitely want to give yourself a really good runway. And this is, I would say, just outside of an IPO, right? You just always
Yeah.
want to give yourself a really good runway of time because you want to make sure that all the relevant stakeholders, whether they're, your head of marketing, your head of PR, the spokespeople, the CFO, if you're dealing with an IPO, you just want to make sure that everybody is aligned on the strategy because this, once you send out the press release, you can't unsend it. So that's why we're really strict at our agency about making sure that we have enough time and enough of a runway to do a good job, right? So in terms of timing, that's really what I would say. Give yourself enough time. You want to make sure that you do the following things within this in this time frame. You want to make sure that you have a robust messaging session either with your external agency or internally. What is this product? Who are you as a firm? Why should anyone care? And you have to really important, you have to go beyond the characteristics of the product, right? Like let's say you're pitching like a fintech platform. Running through all the technical specifications that's not a story. Those are just the bells and whistles that it has, right?
Well, and it's boring. Nobody
And it's
wants to hear
boring.
that.
Nobody wants to
Nobody
hear
wants to
that,
hear
right? And that might be, listen, at the end of the day, that technical specification might be the differentiator between you and your competitor. But
right.
a good PR person will see beyond that. And that's something I
Mhm.
want to talk about maybe a little bit later is like kind of like seeing behind the IPO story, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
like the person or what's happening in the world that makes that IPO relevant on, Tuesday, March 22nd. Like what is it about Tuesday, March 22nd? What was happening at the time that connected that IPO to something more timely in the financial market? So suffice it to say that internally, externally, however you want to set up your PR campaign, before you even really dive into the strategy, just really get aligned on the message and who is this message for? That's another
Well,
big thing. I'm sure you run into that all the time too.
yeah, absolutely. Well, for everything, right? But actually, I wouldn't mind like pausing and just kind of diving into what you were just saying behind the IPO story and building that story and making sure you're relevant. How do you really build the story around the timing of an IPO, and what should you be looking for when you're building that story?
So in my world, in the world of, or in our world of exchange traded funds in particular, and again, this is something that can be applied, I think, to other IPOs. But before we talk about the story, I want to just talk about the timing because that's where the nuance really comes in.
Yeah, yeah.
Is anyone who works in a regulated industry knows that there's a quiet period, and then there's an effective window, and then there's the launch period. And so what we try to do is, and this doesn't happen every time, but the magic and the nuance comes in this effective window. What does that mean? An
Mhm,
effective window is when the SEC says you can publicly discuss this. Even if it's not launch, you can discuss it. During the
mhm.
quiet period, you cannot discuss it with anyone. So you cannot be talking to investors, you cannot be talking to the press, you cannot talk to anybody about it. You have to keep everything internal.
And to be clear, that quiet period, because we've done PR during quiet periods before, the quiet period is talking specifically about that IPO or specifically about that event or anything
Correct.
investor related, right? It doesn't mean you can't
Correct.
talk about the company or,
Oh,
you
yeah,
know, the
sorry.
founder and things like that, right?
Exactly. No, it's
Yeah.
very specific. That's a really good nuance point. It's very specific to whatever it is that is IPOing.
Right.
So,
Okay.
but if you are, I would just push back, I guess, and say if you're an existing firm and you have a lot of products in the market, and you're talking about a PR campaign for a product you're about to IPO during the quiet period, you could obviously talk about all your other products.
Yeah.
But if you're, because we get this a lot, if you're a new company and that this we're talking about your first IPO, you want to be very cautious because just talking about your founders, the reporter's going to start asking, well, what are you the founder of? Right. So,
Right.
like, well, what is the
Right.
product that you're telling me that you guys are going to launch? And that's when it starts to get murky. So, just to stay above board, we recommend that all pitching really happens once the product is either effective or once it's launched.
Right. Okay.
The
So
difference between
nothing new. Nothing new. Do
nothing
not
new,
talk about
nothing
anything
new.
new.
Nothing new.
Okay.
That's a great way to think about it. And so you have this short window where you can be effective. And sometimes, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing, but in the world of ETFs, you can be effective and launch on the same day, or you can be effective and launch a week later. And so sometimes you don't get a window, but
Hmm.
sometimes you do get a window. And if you get a window, that's a great time to think about, okay, who can we softball pitch this story to? Which are the reporter contacts that have done us a solid in the past or that we've worked with in the past, or we know we're going to be interested in the story? Who can we set up an exclusive with? If you can set up an
Hmm.
exclusive with somebody, it basically is running up to them and giving them a big hug and saying, I want you to cover this before anybody else. And I find that for a very discerning reporter at a discerning publication, that could really go a long way. So these are small tips and tricks of, if you're in the world of financial services, if you're dealing with a product that's about to IPO, how you can use this timing to your advantage. How
What
you
are
can
the
use
what are the
this.
numbers that usually sway them? Because I mean, obviously, they're not gonna. Maybe they won't cover every single IPO. Is it the industry that typically sways them, like the choice of industry, or is it a certain number or a certain valuation? Like, what are they looking for to say yes, I want that?
It's really, at the end of the day, I find that they're most interested in what's behind the product. Like, what is the product investing in general? So for instance, we've had clients that are very heavily invested in the world of ESG. It's something that's been very popular in the last
Okay.
couple of years in the world of investments. There's ESG hedge funds and mutual funds and ETFs and all sorts of things, but ESG as a theme has been very popular.
And ESG is environmental social good. Yes. Okay.
Environmental, social, and corporate governance.
And sorry, corporate governance. Okay. Yes.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just want to
So
make
these
sure
are,
everybody knows.
yeah, no, yeah, definitely. Sorry. So ESG is a way of thinking about, investing in products that either omit things that are morally quote unquote wrong, omitting things that could be a hazard like tobacco or firearms. And obviously these are all very subjective, right? I mean,
Yes.
I don't personally necessarily agree with these omissions, but this is just operationally speaking what we're talking about. So ESG either deals with things that get eliminated. ESG could also say, we want to specifically look at investing in companies that have a larger share of women on the board. That's where the corporate governance part comes in, right? So now
Mhm.
they're looking at more of like the makeup of the employees at the company, and are they well represented? So ESG is kind of a wider topic, but an example of thinking beyond the actual product is pitching a reporter who maybe doesn't cover ETFs but covers ESG, because they might be interested to know that
Sure.
there is an ETF that falls under the ESG umbrella that they might want to write about, right? Because if you're a reporter, if you're a good reporter, you want
Mhm.
to cover your beat in every single angle possible. And
Right.
so we kind of try to play off of the themes behind the products, as opposed to saying, listen, we have a product, it's going to have X amount of companies in the product, it's going to invest in this particular sector, it has this expense ratio. These are all just features and characteristics that are pretty boring. It's really thinking about, what is it about ESG? Why is ESG so popular? Is it because millennials and more women have been investing in the last few years and they care about these things more? Like, there's
Mhm.
always the why behind it. So we always try to think about the why behind something. And that's how we can kind of come back full circle and think about, this product is launching on this day. How does it speak to a greater theme or trend that's happening in the world, in the news, in the markets, whatever it is? And how can we if you're really thinking about if you're doing your job as a PR person, you're thinking about a reporter writing a story, could this product be inserted into the story to further make the point that ESG is something that more and more investors are paying attention to? So that's kind of,
Sure.
we kind of have to back into it a little bit sometimes to think
Yeah.
about the greater story, but that's how we think about it.
No, I love that. I love that. I think that's a great I think that's a great point to just kind of, pause on a little bit just because I think when people are generating news, they just don't think beyond whatever they're already in because, like you're just in your bubble. So I think that's really important. Okay. So I stopped you at the kind of what's behind the story step. What is the next step?
Okay, so then so once we've kind of gotten beyond the story, the next step is for us to think about, if we have this window, this effective window, the next step
Right.
is for us to think about, okay, who is our dream reporter? Like, who would we absolutely, and this is a conversation we have with the client, who do we absolutely love to cover the story? Is it a broadcast? Is it radio? Is it a podcast? Is it a trade publication? Is it a mainstream publication? And we make a list of maybe 4 or 5 reporters that we'd like to go after, the exact reporter, the publication, their email address. We share that with the client. We have a conversation about it. And then we sequentially will pitch that reporter. So we'll pitch reporter 1. And if in a couple of hours they don't get back to us in time, we'll move on to the next person, the next person. This is important because you can't pitch an exclusive to multiple people at the same time, right? It's like you can't set up a date with 6 people on a Tuesday night. You got to start with
Yeah.
one person. And if that person's busy, you move on to the next person. It's sort of like that.
And something to kind of just note here. So, an exclusive is when you're giving one person a story. An embargo is literally just when you're pre briefing someone or you're telling them ahead of time and they're holding their story till a specific time and date. So, that's the difference. So, don't get those two things confused. Especially when you're telling someone you're giving them an exclusive, give them an exclusive. Don't give them an embargo on accident because journalists get pissed off, and I've experienced it before. I'm sure Alex has experienced it before.
Yeah.
It's not the best position to be in, and it's really hard to back out of that position. So I would just make sure everybody on your team knows, or the person pitching knows, or your PR team knows, or whoever that's what you're offering, and be very very clear about that.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point. Just to take that one step further, if you want, during the exclusive conversation, you can also have that exclusive reporter embargo the story until launch day.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
another way to kind of play the IPO, right? You really have to think about, do you want investors, let's say a product is launching on June 5th. Do you want the story to come out on the morning of June 5th? Or do you want investors to know about it on June 4th? That's there's not a one size fits all answer to that.
Yeah.
It's really case by case and product by product.
It's
similar, I'm sure, to
strategy.
what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, just really think about the end user, the reader of these articles, think about the reporter, and think about your product, and think about the best way to time everything out so that you can keep the reporter happy and hopefully have them writing about you in the future, and how to make an investor happy. If an investor sees a story on June 4th for a product that isn't publicly available on June 5th, well, they might get annoyed that it's not it's not actively tradable. But at the same time, it's a nice way to create buzz. So again, this is not a one size fits all response. It really, it's different for every client. I've worked with a variety of communications teams in-house at the client, and people have just different preferences. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Depends on what you're trying to do. Like you said
What am I
buzz,
trying to do?
like generating buzz, or do you want to generate sales? Like, what are you going for?
What are you trying to do? Exactly. So again, these are a lot of the internal conversation that we're having at the agency to think about, how are we best going to position this client to grow assets, right? Is it creating buzz? Kind of like that would be the holy grail,
getting
right?
something
Article comes out in the Wall Street Journal on the day of launch. It links to a brokerage account, or it links back to the client's website, and that is, that would be beautiful.
Yeah. the piece de resistance.
Yes.
A quick question so I'm going back to the exclusive and embargo because I do get this question a lot. And so when it comes to, okay, let's say I've chosen the Wall Street Journal, I'm going to give them an exclusive. When is it okay to start talking to other reporters?
Great question.
Because that doesn't mean that you can't ever. It just means for the exclusive, they need to have a certain window of time where their story is the only one that's appearing. So how do you
Exactly.
how do you usually manage that? I'm sure it's a little bit different than the way we do it.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely is product dependent. I would say, generally speaking, when we pitch an exclusive story to the reporter, I'll tell them, I'm coming to you first.
Mhm.
Let's use this June 5th date. I have to use dates because everything is so specific to timing, right? So let's say
Right.
that the product or let's say the product is IPOing on June 5th. June 3rd, you go to a reporter, you say, we love your coverage. Our client has picked you as the top reporter that would love to cover this story. Just a heads up, on June 5th, we're going to send out a press release to everybody else. So this is going to be public. Like, everyone's going to know about this come June 5th.
Mhm.
I'm coming to you 2 days early. Would love to set up an interview end of day today or first thing tomorrow morning. Would love for you to publish the story the morning of June 5th. I'm telling you right now that the morning of June 5th, I have a responsibility to the public, because a press release, in the world of finance, a press release typically has to go out
At
because
a
that's
certain
part of,
day.
at a certain day, at a certain time, because that's public, to make everyone publicly aware, public disclosures. And so we say, come June 5th, everyone else is going to know about this. So you have a good 48 hours to get ahead of it. And,
Right.
and I think in the world of financial services, reporters get that. They understand disclosures, they understand the timing. So I think the important takeaway is, whether you're preparing for an IPO or anything, anytime you're dealing with an exclusive story with a reporter, just be very upfront. We're giving you this exclusive. We're letting you know 48 hours before everybody else.
Yeah.
In 48 hours, I have to tell everybody else about it. And they're typically willing to play ball. And sometimes I'll say, I spoke to my editor. I'm happy with our article coming out when everybody else's comes out. Or I spoke to my editor and we're going to fast track this. We're going to make sure it gets out the day before. Again, you're dealing with different publishers and you're
Yeah.
dealing with different editors and whatnot. So definitely have a conversation about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and especially like Alex is saying, like, if you have this really, like, dream reporter that you really wanna work with, that could, for them, be the difference between taking your story and not taking it. So, I mean, I know
Absolutely.
TechCrunch is just freaking, like, they're just insane about exclusives. So they love exclusives. Once it's broken, it's very hard to get into into their
Yeah.
coverage, especially when it comes to financials. So like any acquisitions or series funding or anything like that, that's obviously pre-IPO. They really love to have it first and only be the only ones.
Yeah, exactly. And again, PR is so much about, I know I sound like a broken record, but PR is so much about putting yourself in someone else's shoes to do it
Yeah.
effectively, right? Put yourself in the shoes of the person who's eventually reading this article, right? What's going to interest them the most? Put yourself in the shoes of the reporter. Put yourself in the shoes of the editor. You have to remember, I mean, you know this, but to the audience, like, publications are all competing against each other, especially
Mhm.
in finance, right? Everyone wants to break the story first.
Yeah.
Even though this is not investigative journalism necessarily, there is sort of a pecking order of things. So a publication like the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, CNBC, The Economist, etc., an exclusive is a much bigger deal to them because it helps uphold their credibility as, like, the news, the financial news first. So keep in mind that during all of the strategy sessions that your PR person is having, they really need to be thinking about, okay, how is this going to make the publication happy? Because I've been in situations before and I've seen it with my colleagues at a former PR firm that I worked at. If you promise an exclusive to CNBC and then CNBC sees that client talking about that story on Fox Business, they're probably not going to invite you back. So
Wow.
they take it very seriously.
Yeah.
They take it
Yeah.
very seriously. They're
Ouch.
very competitive. They're very competitive amongst. It's a friendly competition, but the publication, the broadcast outlets, etc., the Bloombergs, the Fox businesses, the
Yeah.
CNBCs, they're always striving to be first in breaking a story, and you have to operate within that understanding in order to be very effective when it comes to this kind of PR.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I think that's a good thing to point out. You can burn bridges very easily in PR.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, are we onto a next step? So we've come through this timing situation. What is the next thing?
So once you figure out, your timing, and you figured out your timing, you figured out your exclusive reporter list, you've gone down your list,
Mhm.
you've gotten, there's 5 people on the list. Maybe reporter number 3 says, yes, I want to do this story. Okay, great. Then, you work with that reporter, you get them everything they need, the right people to interview, background materials, web materials, press release, et cetera. Make sure they have absolutely everything they need. And this is important because the last thing you want them to do is they're rushing to write a story and they're realizing at 10 p.m. at night that they don't have the fact sheet or they don't have this one piece of information that they need. Maybe it's a link to the prospectus, whatever it is. So you want to make sure you want to make a nice little package for them, send it off to them because they're going to be in a massive rush to get the story out to make it worth their exclusivity, right? To get it out in front of everybody else. So you want to make sure the reporter has everything. You want to ideally set up a phone interview with the spokesperson at the company, right? Mm-hmm. That's going to be overseeing the IPO and the reporter. And then at that point, it's really a waiting game, and it's an exciting waiting game because it's awesome to see a story online in print, what have you, when it's an exclusive because it really sets the tone for the rest of the campaign. The big publication covers it. There's a very good chance that a lot of smaller publications are going to repurpose it, repost it, or write their own version of it. And so, if you get a really good reception on an exclusive, it's a sign of good things to come, I think. And so, once that whole exclusive process has been done. At that point, we're basically like, okay, one big publication has written the story. Now, on the actual day of the IPO, we share the news with everybody else. Mm-hmm. And that means sharing the press release. That means putting together at the way we do it at our agency, at least everyone's a little bit different, but we don't just send a press release. We individually email the reporters. We put a little teaser, like a little personal note in there,
right.
Which could either be personal to the reporter if you have a good rapport with them, checking on their kids or something like that, or it could be a personalized note that hi Mary or Joe, and then does an extra step of saying, here, big IPO today. Here below my signature, please find the press release. And then what I like to do is take a couple of sentences to connect why this press release is timely today.
Yeah.
What is happening in the news cycle today that they can work it into their coverage. And I find that people don't realize that they think they just send a press release, but then you're making the reporter do all of this work. And
to figure out why it's important. Yeah.
To figure out why it's important or why it's timely or whatever. Or, again, in the world of finance, we're dealing with the stock market and the financial news cycle and whatever, and the timeliness of that. And so if we can take an extra step and basically make a connection between why this random ESG product is launching today, June 5th, and what is happening in the world that makes it so you, Joe from the Wall Street Journal, need to write about this right now. And that's a step, and that's a nuance that I think maybe a lot of people who are doing PR on their own don't pick up on.
Yeah.
I think I don't understand. So. Like we sent them the press release. The press release is just like the most basic thing.
And also they don't have to read it. They're not required by law to read your press release.
Exactly.
I feel like people just forget the fact, like everybody doesn't read every email. How many emails do you delete every day?
Exactly.
Without even opening it. So I think that's definitely something to keep. I was actually just complaining to a colleague of mine today saying like, why did she just forward me this email and say, see below? Like she couldn't just use a sentence to paraphrase what was below instead of and then not only that, below was like a chain of emails. So then I had to like figure that out. So it's like 1 minute turned into 10 minutes or 5 minutes. And so it was just, and nobody wants to go through that because I'm sure they'll just get frustrated and give up.
Exactly. No, I think that's a really, really good point is assume no one's going to read anything. That's like number one. So how do you get them to open the email, which is challenge, like the first, hoop you need to jump through in this obstacle course. So really think about your subject line. Sometimes we keep it pretty dry and pretty, regulatory friendly. And it's just like a very straightforward subject line. But whenever possible, like we like to change it up. I don't want to use the word clickbait because that's not what we're doing here, but you got to
make it clickable.
You got to make it clickable. You got to do something that's going to pique the reporter's interest. Remember, the reporter got your email and 100 other emails within the same 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So you got to keep that in mind too, right? Like no one's sitting around. I think the biggest challenge that we have in explaining to clients what we do, because we have some clients that just don't really know what PR is, and that's okay. That's why they're coming to us. And I they're like thinking that a reporter's just like sitting around waiting for our email, to talk about this prospective IPO.
Yes.
And I'm like, no. One of the many things we talk about before we send something out is, well, what's the subject line going to be? Is it going to be the same as the press release headline, or is it going to be something that's a little bit more engaging,
sexy,
a little more sexy? Which, I don't know how to make financial marketing sexy, but yeah, exactly. How do you make it more palatable? And how do you make it so someone's going to want to click on it in that moment?
Right.
Not because sometimes a reporter won't open. I mean, I'm sure you've dealt with this. A reporter doesn't open your email for like 2 weeks.
And then you get a response like way later and you're like, oh, I sent that 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's, think about the timeliness, think about the urgency. Like, what is it? What is it that's going to make a reporter stop what they're doing,
Mhm.
stop writing a story, open their inbox and click on your email? And I think that's the first, I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but that's what we find to be the first hurdle.
No, I think that's a great point, and I think even maybe putting, like, a date or, like I wouldn't put, like, urgent in the headline because that would probably piss somebody off, but, like and I'm sure someone is thinking that right now. Um, I wouldn't put urgent, but what I would put is maybe like, "Hey, this is gonna be embargoed till this date," or something
Yeah.
like that to just let them know that you're shopping it out and telling people the story, or, "Hey, this release is going out on this date. It's a preview of a press release that's going out June 5th, right?
Yep.
So that way they know, okay, there's like a kind of a deadline on this. And then whatever context you can add in like a couple words, right? Like 2 to 3 words.
Yeah.
And I'm sure like some press releases are really easy to pitch because they have like a big name in them. Like we just had a press release with Disney. Well, if I put Disney in the headline in the subject line, then of course,
That's going to help.
it's gonna need a lot more opens than just entertainment company. So I think that's something to be aware of too. And I think we've got a couple podcasts on pitching and subject lines and stuff like that. But I think we can link over to our kind of best practices in pitching. But that's kind of one of those things where, yeah, you have to catch their eye, and you can't assume that they're waiting around for you.
Yeah, yeah, and then kind of bringing it back to the IPO world, there's products are IPOing all the time. So even if you
Yeah.
think, oh, it's fine, this is not going to a lifestyle or an entertainment reporter, it's just going to a finance reporter. Finance reporters are dealing with daily IPOs and they're dealing with minute by minute market moves. So you have to keep that in mind. They have a
Mhm.
very short window of attention and time span. And I think that's really something we've seen. I mean, I think since 2000, I think we talked about this on our last call, like since 2008, we've seen a huge shift in the way reporters are working. Less long form stories, less printed
Yes.
pages. They're less
Mhm.
willing to sit on a phone with a client for an hour for, an amazing story. It's like quick hits, get it out, catchy subject line, because the publishing industry has just changed so much that reporters have had to really shift their workflow to follow suit. So they're writing more short stories and they're getting them out really, really quickly. So you have to
Yeah.
catch them in a very important window of like what their next story is going to be when they're dealing with meetings and dealing with their editors and getting pitched a million stories a day. I mean, some of my best advice is really if you're trying to get a career in PR or you're an internal marketing PR person and you're trying to, make waves about your IPO, and you're strapped for cash and you want to do it internally, that's totally doable. Really, really think about the reality of somebody who doesn't know you at all to open your email on the day and the time that you want them to open the email.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so I mean, you've kind of disclosed a lot of tips here. So there's a lot for people to just digest. Is there anything that we're missing? I mean, I'm sure there's more. I don't know if there's more steps. Is it measurement? Is it
At that
anything
point,
else? Following up?
yeah, yeah, no, at that point, so we've kind of gotten to the point where you've gotten your exclusive, we're past the quiet period, we're past the effective window, it's launch day. In a perfect world, some big publication has already covered the story. So your client's like super happy. Now all these other publications are writing about it. Okay, now what happens, right? It's been about a week or two since your product launched.
Yeah.
You're milking that launch story as much as you can. You're trying to get into every crevice of every publication out there who would be, a relevant publication, of course. I'd be interested in it. Okay, now what? The fact that you IPO'd or the fact that your product launched 2 weeks ago, that's no longer news, right? The news cycle moves fast. You got to keep
Yeah.
up. So
Yeah.
now it's like, okay, what do we do? And what we tell clients that we do, the way we do it at our agency, is we start pivoting. We start pivoting to the greater story beyond the product. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier, using the ESG example of like, okay, the product's out in the marketplace. Maybe it's gotten some good traction. You could do a pitch about that. But that's not as interesting. I think the greater story is we've been out in the market for a couple of weeks. If you're talking about a fintech platform or something, maybe you have some interesting use cases that you want to share with
Case
reporters,
studies or something
case
like that.
studies,
Yeah.
exactly, implementation case studies. This is how it's been working. This is how it's been performing. If it's a financial product that's really measured by its assets under management or its trading volume, you could share some interesting statistics around that. But what really gets good coverage, what really makes our clients thought leaders, is thinking of what are some bigger themes beyond this. So an
Mhm.
example of that would be like in December is a month where people really, it's the end of the year and people are really thinking about in the world of finance, tax loss harvesting. That's like a big thing that people are thinking about. And so, is there something about your product that lends itself to tax loss harvesting? So really think about like every month there's a theme, right? Like March is Women's Month,
Some kind
some
of
kind of
seasonal story.
seasonal,
Yeah.
yeah, pumpkin spice, tax loss harvesting. What's a seasonal story that you can connect your product to? And if it's like a random season, I don't mean season like spring, summer, but if it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the month of June and there isn't really anything in June that's happening, is there a Fed meeting that's happening? Is it
Right.
earnings season?
Right, right.
Right. And so, did the president just go on TV and talk about interest rate? Like, what is happening in the national discourse that reporters are already writing about the national discourse? How do you insert your product or your service or your client into that conversation? It's on the PR person or the PR team to make that link. So,
Mhm.
what is the
Yes,
greater
yes.
story behind this product? How can
Agreed.
this product be quoted in an article that lends credence to the thesis of what that reporter is writing about whatever's happening in that season?
Yeah, and I
So,
think it's important to, like, kinda strategize these early if you can.
absolutely.
Not everything you're gonna be able to plan before the IPO because some things come out, right? Some things come out
Exactly.
and like you said, timeliness is a big thing. So,
Exactly.
but you could also identify like, "Okay, hey guys, we're gonna watch these 3 to 4 key trends, and then once we're ready to pivot off of IPO news, we're gonna switch to this topic," and then
Exactly.
start pitching, yeah.
And that's something, no, that's a great point. And that's something that we like to identify during the messaging session. So to your
Mhm.
point, we don't know if something crazy is going to happen,
Right.
the week of launch, and so we can't plan for that. But what we can plan for during our messaging session with the client is what are some evergreen themes and topics,
Mhm.
that we know are going to have staying power throughout the year, regardless of what's happening in the news cycle. Because sometimes the news, there might be a lot happening in the news, but it's not really relevant to the client's product. So then it's like,
Sure.
okay, plan B is what are some secular themes that like always are going to have staying power? They're always going to be relevant. And so we try to attach ourselves to those themes in a time where maybe there isn't something really salient going on in the news.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. We do that too. We kind of piggyback on seasons and themes, and we do holiday gift guides and,
Yeah,
September, and we're doing all that kind of stuff. So I think that's a really important point, and it's kind of relevant in any industry, not just, finance, but also in products and enterprise is there a big show going on? Is there a conference? Is there, you know,
absolutely.
anything that could be relatable.
Exactly. Exactly.
So
And yeah.
go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say you're just much more likely to convince a reporter to write about the product or the launch or whatever it is if you can make that connection for them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then also establish that longer term relationship with them, right? Because
Exactly.
they're like, "Oh, these people are so dynamic. They can talk about
Yeah,
more
yeah.
than one thing."
Yeah, no, and I think that's another good point is, and I mean, I don't know how you guys do this at your agency, but at our agency, we really tell clients, listen, like it's great that you can spit out all the facts and features about your product. That's not, I mean, that's great, but I mean, I hope that's a given. You're the spokesperson. But
Yeah.
what I really need you to do is talk about the market, right? Talk about the Fed meeting, talk about earnings season. Like, are you comfortable talking about these things that we know reporters are already writing about?
Mhm.
And if
Mhm.
and then during the messaging session is when we figure out how to segue from the product into what's happening in the greater market. So you also need buy-in from the spokesperson for that. That's
Well, and
another thing.
I was actually talking to someone about this maybe yesterday. I don't know. My days are like just gelling together. But at some point, like, this or last week, we were just talking about like you have to have some kind of stance or opinion to be able to be interesting to reporters on an ongoing basis. You can't be the guy that just like is complacent, agreeing with what's happening. You have to say something a little bit different or like
Yeah.
have a position. And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of where you're going with that. It's like, okay, say something interesting and then let's like hang our hat on it for a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And interesting can mean unique or new, like something that hasn't been
Yeah.
done yet, which is tough, but it's out there. unique or different or interesting could be controversial,
Yep.
right? It
Yep.
could be a unique take on something. The whole world is telling you to, like, sell Amazon, but this is why we think you should buy Amazon. Like, that's just an
Right.
example. But yeah, no, absolutely. And then in the absence of that is going back to the human element, is like, okay, does this fund manager or does this investment manager or this product manager, is there something interesting about them as a person, or maybe in a past life that they had, a previous career that they had, that would
Hmm.
make this interesting? I mean, in the world of finance, I don't know if you're familiar with Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank.
Okay.
He
Yeah. Yeah.
has
Of course.
he has a whole slew of mutual fund and exchange traded fund products, and he's already a built-in celebrity. So, like,
Hmm.
everybody wants to talk to him. So I mean, that's an extreme example, and
Yeah.
I wish we could work with more Kevin O'Learys, but that's just one example to say, if there is something that you're already known for, whether it's in finance or whatever industry you're in, or a previous world, use that,
Yeah. 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 That's great. Okay. So I think we're coming to a close here. Anything that we didn't talk about, that big mistakes people make, or anything that, like, you want to just reveal to this audience?
Ooh, I mean, this one's really obvious, but it surprises me how often we run into it. Clients that don't, or companies or clients that just don't take advantage of launch day. There's a
Yeah.
lot of firms out there. I know this sounds really basic, but, like, there's a lot of firms out there that are like, we're gonna launch our product, but we want to create buzz 6 months later. And I'm like, well, the reporter that I pitched this story to 6 months later is going to be like, why am I now hearing about this? And they're actually going to get annoyed. And
Yeah.
that's something that I've come across a couple of times when we're dealing with a client that launched a product and they didn't have a PR team in place and they didn't really have a marketing team in place. And then they launched it. And then, like, 6 months later, they come to us and they're like, we need to revive the momentum in this fund. What can you do? And I'm like, what, well, where's your launch press release? And they're like, we didn't do one. I'm like, okay. Or maybe they did one from a regulatory standpoint. They just posted it on their website. They didn't actually,
Right.
distribute it. And so, and that's a tough one. I mean, it's doable. We've done it before. We'll do it again, but it's a challenge. And
You're
so
like backpedaling at that point.
you're kind of backpedaling, and the reporter's like, the reporter's like, in the future, let me know when this launches. And I'm like, yes, if I had been working with this client 6 months ago, you would have already heard about it.
Right.
So taking advantage of launch day, that is your news for that month, right? That is the
Yeah.
big story coming out of your firm. That is your milestone. So not taking advantage of launch day is something I've seen in the past. And that's that's low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Even if you don't have a lot of PR experience, even if this whole, like, the timing, the effective date, the window, the quiet period, even if all
Yeah.
that confuses you, talk to your compliance team, talk to legal, and make sure at the very least you can get a press release out on launch day, and that it's going to a good 50 contacts that would be interested in it. If that's all you can do, that's better than nothing.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're even talking from a financial perspective, which I think is more focused on time. I get it all the time with products. I get people saying like, "Hey, yeah, we never did a launch." And then it's actually the same story with our media.
Yeah.
Well, this has been out on the market for 6 months. Why didn't you contact me before? Shouldn't they be on a version 2 by now? And you're like, well,
Yeah. Yeah.
they
So,
had some
yeah.
challenges."
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, and here's another very obvious, but I assume in the world of fintech more so than in the world of finance, because you can't launch a partially finished product in finance. It just doesn't work that way.
Right.
It's either approved or it's not approved by the SEC. But I assume in the world of fintech, you can kind of extrapolate this lesson, which is, a reporter doesn't want to write about a product that's, like, kind of in a sort of beta stage, right? They don't
Yeah.
want they want
Yeah.
they want, like, the full-fledged experience.
Yeah.
Because if they write about it during this beta stage and then it resurfaces later that, like, there was a bug or whatever, that's going to make them look really bad, and they will never write about you again.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that is one of the biggest things that people that don't really understand PR overlook, is that the journalist they have like a image to keep up, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They have a reputation to keep. I mean, everything that they do is written in in the World Wide Web or in ink or
Correct.
whatever. Like,
Yeah.
they can't. I mean, yeah, you can edit stuff sometimes, but typically, oh no, only people edit things when there's factual inaccuracies.
Right.
And it's like
100%.
pretty much the only time. And even for the journalists, like, they can't really take it back. So, I mean, that's something to really consider when you're working with media at any time, is like, they can't
Absolutely.
take it back, and they have to make it sound good. So make sure what you're presenting to them is like the real deal too.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And, in the rare instances where we've worked with a client, not on a specific product, but like an event or maybe a service or something like that, sometimes they'll send me like the spec sheet of, I'm like, okay, send me all your background materials. Like, tell me about this event or tell me about this new service you're launching. And it's like,
Uh-huh.
there's a lot of holes. And I'm like, no, 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 no. I need the full picture. Like, I need to know who the speaker is. I know what date, what time. I need to know everything because when you go to the media, there's a finality to it. Like
Yeah.
you can't
Yeah.
take it back. And again, I think that's another mistake people make is think like, oh, we'll just soft launch it. We'll see what happens. It's like, well, I mean, no, let's
I've heard the soft launch thing before and it's just so silly.
Yeah,
It-
no, once it hits the internet, it's a hard launch. So
yeah.
you
Yeah.
gotta be ready for that. And events in particular, finance or otherwise, I find to be tough for that because speakers are changing constantly. The date can
Yeah.
be changing. The event location can be changing. I mean, not even to talk
Sure.
about COVID, but just before COVID. And so I always say to clients, listen, like if you want a reporter to show up, or if you want a reporter to send a camera crew, or if you want a reporter to just cover it remotely, like we need all of these details. Like you need to deal with your event team, and I need to know all of this stuff is set in stone before I go out and shop it around.
Oh yeah, that's the worst, having to go back, change the location, change the time, change the day, and then they're like, "I don't wanna deal with you anymore."
Yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
then
Put
it
yourself in
makes
their
us
shoes. It makes
yeah,
you
it
look
makes us
bad. Yeah,
look
it makes
bad.
it look
Yeah,
bad. Yeah,
absolutely,
exactly. So
absolutely.
again, PR, putting yourself in the shoes of the reporter. Would you want to be covering an event that changes all the time? Of course not.
Yeah.
So yeah, so a lot of it is really just common sense sometimes.
Yes.
I mean, it's funny. It's like some of it is like very industry specific. I've been doing this for a long time. Like I know about all the timing and all the nuances, but then some of it I'm like, it's really just common sense.
Well, but I think yeah, I think that people just don't really think, like again, like they think PR is like some kind of magic bullet, everyone's waiting for you. Everyone has a different perspective on that. So I think for us talking about it, I think it really highlights like the main things people should really think about. So thank
Yeah.
you so much because I think you gave like just so many important critical tips, not just for finance, but for anybody who's doing any kind of media relations or PR. Where can people find you?
So yeah, people can find us. Well, you can always send me an email. I'm at alevis, Alevis at arrocom.com, ARROCOMM.com. If you ever want to chat about financial marketing or financial PR, please drop me a note. Otherwise, you can go to our website, arrocom.com. Again, ARROCOMM.com. You could take a look at our work. You can take a look at our case studies. You could take a look at how we've helped clients in the past,
Mhm.
as well as our design portfolio, which we offer as well. So would love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, all that information will also be in the show notes as it normally is. And thank you, Alex. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.